Here we are today, fucking the system. That's System of a Down. Wait.
We're raging against the machine.
We're raging against the machine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Deep Dive into the Archive. In this episode, we're diving into Rage Against the Machine's self-titled debut.
Yeah, this album's got a lot of great energy. Came out in 1992. Band's debut album, as he said. It's just an album brimming with energy, brimming with creativity. It's a good album, and we'll get into more of that.
We're into a lot of extreme, in-your-face, aggressive music. Bands like Nails or Converge or Dillinger Escape Plan stuff that's really in your face. That's really angry sounding. And despite all that, I feel like this is still one of the angriest records I've ever heard.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. If I'm not in the mood to fight someone and you need to get me in the mood to fight someone, play any song off this record.
Yeah, it's just the way the band creates these tracks. They constantly go from these very quiet, reserved verses and then just explode into the chorus. It's so, engrossing. It's fantastic.
It gets your blood pumping. It gets you moving. If you're looking for some, workout music, I guess, this is also fantastic workout music. It's very heavy when it needs to be, and then it just pulls back and explodes and pulls back. It has this great kind of cyclical nature. And lots of the songs, they have all these different and very unique sections to them, which all work together incredibly well and are really, like I said, they're blood pumping, they're energy inducing, they get you moving.
Tom Morello's guitar work on this record is incredible. Easily some of the best guitar work on, I think, any record I've ever heard. It's so creative and weird and out there. It's intense and groovy and punchy when it needs to be. You have so many of these weird out there solos that are present throughout the record. They just work with the feel and energy of the album perfectly.
There are times where the guitars on this album don't even sound like guitars. They sound like alarms or a saw.
A siren. There's one song on here, I think I wrote in my notes, it sounds like someone screaming almost. Yeah, the guitar work's incredible, as well as all the other instrumentation on this record.
Definitely Zach De La Rocha, the vocalist, and Tom Morello, the guitarist, get a lot of credit as far as Rage Against the Machine goes. But that's not to overlook Tim Comerford, their bassist, and Brad Wilk, their percussionist and drummer. Literally every piece of instrumentation on this album works so well together that if you took any one element out, it would feel weird, definitely.
The drums are often used to accent a lot of the other instruments. You have a lot of cymbal hits that just kind of crash down with the guitars. And the bass, just the way that the bass plods along in so many tracks, it works so well to back the guitars, and it's super groovy, it's super fun, it gets your blood pumping.
We can just dive in. We can start with Bomb Track, which leads this album off, and it is a fantastic opener.
You might say it's a bomb track.
Yeah, they are using the title Bomb Track as they have the double meaning of saying it's a great song and also bomb your enemies. You know.
I don't know if that's what they're going for.
They're not actually saying bomb your enemies. Rage Against the Machine is a believer in non-violence, but very much a believer in anger.
Yeah.
There's a difference.
This track is so in your face and intense. I love the cymbals especially do so well to complement all the vocals. They hit on all the right beats on this track.
And the way they just lead in to Morello's guitar work is just insane. It just works so well. Also, like we said, the choruses throughout this album are fantastic, but this one's a highlight for me personally. The burn, yes, you're gonna burn is just so, you know?
Yeah. We should also go into Zach De La Rocha's vocals, which, he's ridiculously talented. Flows and rapping on this record, and especially on this song, are pretty amazing. His voice, the way he uses it is so, again, it's very blood pumping. It embodies this, anger that they have built up. His screams, especially on some tracks, oh.
Well, we'll get to this later, but the closer especially is a fantastic example of that, of how it can show his anger.
It adds so much power to these songs. And also, Zach's lyricism is pretty incredible.
He's very pointed in the issues he's talking about. He has some great metaphors there, and he very specifically calls out specific people and events and uses that to prove his points. We'll go through this, but they're very left-leaning, and that complacency and tradition, stuff like that, is bad. Very bad. You should always be trying to progress. You should always be trying to move forward. You should always be questioning authority as well. They're very anarchistic in that sense.
They are anarchists, so...
Yes. And also, institutions and systems are, in general, not good. They're only there to imprison the people. Yeah.
Oppress and keep people from expressing themselves and being who they want to be. You have, like, on Bomb Track, especially, there's, like, some fantastic lines. You have, like, instead I warm my hands upon the flames of the flag to recall the downfall and the businesses that burnt us all. His lyricism is very vivid and, again, very pointed at those who seek to uphold the status quo.
Less so about the status quo is the next track, Killing in the Name, which is just about how cops are awful.
Well, that's kind of the status quo, isn't it?
Cops being awful? I mean, I guess.
Well, more of the police as an institution. But yeah, Killing the Name, probably the most famous track off this record. Probably their most famous track. I love the bass guitar on this track. It's super, like, groovy and, like, ominous sounding.
I wrote crispy. I don't know if that's the right word, but I like it.
This crispy bass.
No, I literally wrote that bass line is crispy. And then I wrote the cowbell, oh, I'm gonna come.
Oh, yeah. There's cowbell in multiple songs in this record, and it is amazing every time it comes up.
Cowbell is an underutilized instrument, especially when you're angry. Like, having a fight to a cowbell is just, oh, you guys should try it sometime. I'm telling you.
This is a very repetitive track, but that imagery that Zach burns into your mind is so good.
He's directly comparing cops to, like, the KKK.
I don't know if it's comparison so much as saying, like, equating them. As he literally says, some of those that work forces are the same that burn crosses. The song was written in response to the Rodney King beating that happened in the 90s. It still feels very relevant today. Also, the way that they kind of reinforce the idea of the police as this institution. You have, now you do what they told you. It's repeated over and over again, talking about how the police have this, like, power over you. They can force you to kind of do what they want and considering who they are. This is a very bad thing. I think you can also kind of apply that to the police themselves, that they're an extension of the state as actors. Despite what they do, it's like not in their best interest. The way that the police are this extension of the state, and also how, while enforcing the state's agenda, I guess, they're doing themselves a disservice, essentially, because they're not the state. They're very much not part of the ruling class. They're simply doing their bidding. You also have, the chorus is pretty fantastic. Those who died are justified for wearing the badge. They're the chosen whites. Also, this outro is, like, amazing. Zach screaming over and over again, "Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me," is, like, it's so good. The way that it builds towards the end, this wave of, like, anger comes crashing down. It's pretty fantastic.
Great energy throughout the track, and it all culminates with that fantastic outro. That takes us to Take the Power Back, which has a slower start with this pounding kick drum and this, like, skittering guitar in the background. Really cool. A lot of the intros are very, like, atmospheric, which adds a lot to the track as a whole. And then they, quote, "bring that shit in," and then explodes into a burst of energy. It's great.
This track's so groovy. I'd call it almost danceable.
I feel like a lot of this album is technically danceable. It gets you moving.
The riffs and grooves that they find and are able to kind of, like, slot into on this record are pretty amazing.
Along with that, the thing is, like, there's no two songs that sound the same throughout this record. It's all very consistent in how great and how groovy, how energetic it all is. Every track here is very unique as well. It has so much personality as an album. This track, lots of fun. talking about how institutions want to stay in power and they will do whatever they can to avoid that. That's why we, quote, gotta take the power back from the institutions.
There's also a lot of stuff about how through these institutions, this very like Eurocentric view, they're very insulated. There's like no room for other cultures and stuff present within them. Like you have on verse 2, Zach says, "The present curriculum, I put my fist in them, Eurocentric, every last one of them, see right through the red, white, and blue disguise. With lecture, I puncture the structure of lies," which also I think plays into this idea that these institutions are perpetuating ideas that are beneficial to them. They want to keep you from like speaking out against them, essentially. They don't want to teach you things that are too quote-unquote controversial or things that would threaten capital owners and stuff like that. Well, next on the record, we have Settle for Nothing, which is, it's pretty fantastic. This track deals a lot with, firstly, Zach's time growing up and his trouble dealing with his broken family, essentially. I mean, he mentioned, like, just before the first verse goes into the chorus, he says, "I got a 9, a sign, a set, and now I got a name," which is essentially like, he's like saying, I'm part of a gang now. I don't think he's part of a gang. But it's like, a lot of the track kind of goes over how, because there aren't these safety nets or things in place to help people in these really shitty situations, that inevitably these people turn to crime, to communities who accept them, but also aren't going to be doing things that are necessarily legal. The chorus, for example, has lyrics, "Read my writing on the wall, no one's here to catch me when I fall, death is on my side, suicide," which is pretty dark.
This song also, at least I interpret it to also talk about complacency, being anti-complacent. Don't take action now, settle for nothing later. The idea that you always need to be doing something to progress. You always need to be pushing yourself further and better and not become complacent and uphold the status quo.
I think it also kind of plays into, this idea comes up later on the album of where Zach talks about how, like, when you become complacent, when you don't actually push for change, later on, when you actually want to change something, you're not going to be able to. I think this track kind of plays into that with how, you know, once you get into a certain, like, mindset and stuff, you slip, as he says.
Also in this track, I want to shout out the instrumentation real quick. The outro has great guitars going off following that guitar solo. I really like how the guitar solo on this track is like a very subdued guitar solo. I think it goes along well with the earlier themes in the track.
The verses on this track have this super, like, eerie, dark sound to them. You have these, like, almost whining guitars and this very slowly progressing strummed guitar in the background until just the chorus comes crashing in. And it's pretty fantastic. The next track is Bullet in the Head, and this track really deals with American propaganda, how these ideas are, like, ingrained into people's, like, brains, to the point where they never think to look outside them, essentially.
There's essentially a one-to-one metaphor here of the bullet in the head to propaganda that goes throughout the track, and there's a lot of great lines here. I want to point out my personal favorite, "Your brain dead, you got a fucking bullet in your head," and how that works with the metaphor. It, like, comes together so well at that point. Also, just, like, great line.
I love the chorus, too. Just victims of the in-house drive-by. Saying how this propaganda it's everywhere. It's on your TVs, in ads, just, like, everywhere. I especially love the follow-up where he says, "They say jump, you say how high." Continuing with this idea that these ideas are so ingrained into people's minds. Something happens and people don't think twice about it. They don't care. They think it's normal. I also love how, like, playful a lot of the guitar work feels.
This is one of the more, like, bouncy tracks, I'd say.
You have this, like, wonderfully odd, like, bass line throughout. Tom Morello's, like, screeching guitar work all over it. It sounds pretty great. I also absolutely love the outro, how it just builds and builds and builds as Zach slowly, like, ramps up his vocals until he's, like, all out screaming. With especially the guitar during the outro, it's so aggressive sounding.
Another fantastic track. This one's actually my personal favorite, Know Your Enemy. I love this track. I love how this song has like 6-7 sections in it that just shift from one to the other, and they're all so great. They all work together so well. It's a track where Zach De La Rocha, again, he shows his incredible skill as a rapper and a lyricist here. Great guitar solo. It's got also, this is the only track with a guest vocalist, which we have a feature from Maynard James Keenan of Tool fame. It's got a great guitar solo. And then the outro to the track. Oh man, the outro just sends like chills down my spine every time I hear it. How the instrumentation fades out and they just leave Zach's vocals just screaming. Really the central message to the track, which is about how the system is institutionalizing people, specifically you.
Just to go over his outro, he says, "Yes, I know my enemies. They're the teachers who taught me to fight me. Compromise, conformity, assimilation, submission, ignorance, hypocrisy, brutality, the elite." And then he says, "All of which are American dreams." And he just repeats that over and over again as the guitars fade out. It's fantastic. This track also has like this really great like momentum to it. It's super groovy. It feels really fast paced because of the drums, which I really love on this track. It is a pretty like kinetic sounding track on the record, and I think that works really well for the subject matter.
Love this entire album, but I don't know, this track is always just a highlight for me personally.
Got the next track called Wake Up. Ominous, like, rolling guitar riff just goes throughout this intro with these super heavy bass lines. It's really great. I love Zach's vocal delivery on this track is amazing. He's super fast paced. He has an amazing flow, and you have some of his best lyrics on this track. There's references to previous tracks. He says, "Cause all these punks got bullets in their heads." And you have Department of Police, the judges, the feds, networks that work keeping people calm. Afterwards he goes like into, I'd say, the central idea of this track. He says, "You know, they went after King when he spoke out on Vietnam. He turned the power to the have-nots, and then came the shot." This track's essentially how whenever people, protest and try to create these movements to improve their lives, they inevitably get killed or taken out by the state, I guess.
He references MLK. He also references Malcolm X. And they have an interlude here where they are quoting FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. He's talking about how they are targeting Black nationalist leaders, pinpoint potential troublemakers, and neutralize them.
Zach afterwards just like yelling, "Wake up," over and over again.
This track is saying that the government or really any institution or corporation or anything like that will never have your best interests at heart. They will try and pretend that is the case, but that is not the case. They have their own best interests at heart, which is the continuation of them in power and authority. Anything that could disrupt that is a threat to them. Up next, Fistful of Steel. I love the wailing guitars on this track.
Oh, yeah.
Over the verses, oh man.
This song, the guitar in this song sounds either like an alarm or like someone screaming in the distance. And it's pretty fantastic. I mean, I love how like chunky and like meaty the chorus riff is too. Just works so well with the feeling of anger on the track.
The guitar solo on this track is the one I was talking about earlier, where to me it sounds like a saw, actually, and not like a person screaming. You could argue it's a person. I mean, it doesn't sound like a normal guitar. Let's leave it at that.
Oh, you mean on the solo? I'm saying on the verses, that guitar.
The solo has like the you know?
Yeah, that
sounds like
does
a saw.
sound like a saw. There's so much creativity just put into the instrumentation on this entire album. And I also love, again, the lyrical content. This is, I guess, kind of continues the ideas about how you can't be silent, how you have to, stand up and fight to make things better, essentially.
Zach is angry at the system, but he's also very angry at those who don't question the system, at those who are complacent.
Next track is Township Rebellion, which is, oh man, those verses are so incredible.
They're very dense. Again, this is talking about like anti-complacency and the need for rebellion. But it's very specifically talking about South Africa. He makes references to Cape of No Hope and also specific places, Johannesburg, South Central. How during the apartheid regime, people of color were forced into what were called townships, which they weren't allowed to live in like the regular city.
They're essentially shanty towns.
Rebel against that. Don't let that shit happen.
The guitars on this track, like especially on the verses, are like screeching. We have this amazing cowbell from the drums, which is I love. You have like this bouncy bass line going on. It's really hard to describe, but it sounds like an instrument making a boing sound. Like, actually. And so good. The solo on this track is amazing. It's like kind of noodly, but it's just like, oh, so cool.
It plays well with that bouncy bass you were talking about earlier.
Oh man, there's so many parts to this track. You have like the bridge at the end where it gets more like, the music gets like more stompy on, is what I would call it. Then lastly, we have what is my favorite track on the album, closer, Freedom, which I think is like one of the greatest closers of all time. This like perfectly encapsulates, I feel, what the album's about. This necessity for people to speak out and protest, and also the idea that like you're not really free in our current society. I mean, I absolutely love the instrumentation. It's so angry and groovy. It's so, it's pretty amazing. Zach's verses are fantastic. Lines like, it's set up like a deck of cards. They're sending us to early graves for all the diamonds. They'll use a pair of clubs that beat the spades. Like, fantastic lyricism.
My personal favorite moment on this track, well, I don't know if it's my favorite. There's a lot of great moments on this track. There's one point where he says, anger is a gift, which really, really helps to encapsulate the idea of this whole album. And it's also, I believe, a Malcolm X quote.
There's also, it like happens, he like whispers it just before you get right into the chorus. It just comes crashing down. It's pretty fantastic.
Also, the outro to this track, where he's just screaming freedom. Well, freedom, yeah, right. I should be more specific.
Probably like the angriest thing I've ever heard in a song. The guitars and drums just like build up slowly as Zach begins to scream over and over again. It's so good.
It really is. This is an excellent closer to an excellent album. This album is fantastic. There is nothing I would change about it. It is so good. Every track, like I said, has so much personality, so much great energy. The guitars, all the instrumentation is incredible. Zach's lyrics, his delivery, again, everything works together so well on this project. One of the greatest albums of all time, easily, in my opinion. Yeah, I'd give it a 10.
This is like one of the best albums of all time. I'd say it's the best protest album of all time. One of the best rock albums ever. It's so just like blood pumping. It like perfectly gets you into Zach's like mental state and mood. It does a fantastic job of talking about the subject matter. It's incredible. Go listen to it. Also, still very relevant today.
Very.
So yeah, I'd give this a 10 out of 10 too. It's a masterpiece. Hey everyone, thanks for watching this episode of Deep Dive into the Archive. If you enjoyed it, please consider giving this video a like and also subscribe. If you enjoyed it, go check out our other deep dives. Maybe you'll find a new album you enjoy. And yeah, I hope you have a wonderful day. You know, if I had a steak, I would fuck it.